What if I told you that the angriest, like, most resentful guys on dating apps aren't the lonely guys sitting in their basements with zero matches, but actually the guys who are going on the most dates?
I mean, that completely shatters the whole cultural narrative we've built around modern romance and, isolation.
It really does. It turns the entire lonely internet radical trope entirely upside down.
Oh, absolutely.
So today, we have a really compelling mission for this deep dive into the source material.
Yeah, and it's a good one.
We are unpacking a fascinating 2026 research paper. It was published in the journal Personality and Individual Differences,
Right.
and it was conducted by researchers at Abo Akademi University in Finland. They surveyed, I think, over 1,600 adults to answer a highly specific question.
Right. They wanted to know, does having difficulty finding a romantic partner actually correlate with holding sexist beliefs?
Exactly. And our goal here, as always, is to impartially follow the data they uncovered.
Yeah, that's crucial. I mean, my mission as the expert today is to just lay out the facts. This paper is vital because it challenges all our preconceived expectations about, well, misogyny and dating dynamics.
Definitely.
And I want to make it super clear up front, especially since we'll be touching on some politically charged concepts later, both left-wing and right-wing. We're not endorsing any of the political viewpoints mentioned in this study.
Right. Zero endorsements.
We are strictly here to impartially report on the content provided in the source material and try to understand the underlying psychological mechanisms. We're just conveying the ideas, nothing more.
Exactly. And I'm so excited about this paper because the researchers didn't just, like, ask people if they were popular.
No, they didn't.
To understand how dating struggles might actually rewire someone's worldview, we first have to understand the specific methodology they use to measure dating success.
Yeah, they had a very specific way of doing it.
They break the dating market down into two very distinct metrics: mate value and mate access.
Right. And I know those terms sound a bit clinical, but they really form the foundation of the whole study.
So where do we start?
Let's start with mate value. In the context of evolutionary psychology, this just refers to a person's overall desirability as a potential partner.
Like how much of a catch they are.
Exactly. The researchers measured this by having the participants self-report their agreement with statements, evaluating their own physical attractiveness, their social status, and just the general amount of attention they receive from potential partners.
And the researchers point out that historically and, evolutionarily, desirability favored specific traits, right?
Yes, very specific traits.
Like for men, it was cues of provisioning. So health, strength, wealth, status.
Right, the ability to provide.
And for women, evolutionary pressures historically favored cues related to fertility, like physical attractiveness and youth.
That's the biological baseline the study operates from, yeah. But having high desirability doesn't automatically mean you get to go on dates.
Right.
And that brings us to the second metric, which is mate access.
Okay.
This one is entirely environmental. It basically measures your perceived opportunity to actually encounter potential partners in your daily life.
So how many people you actually run into?
Exactly. The survey literally asked participants to rate how easy it was for them to meet new people they could potentially date.
I was reading their breakdown of these two metrics, and it feels exactly like financial economics.
Oh, how so?
Well, if we think about it this way, mate value is basically your personal credit score.
Okay, how's that?
It's your individual standing, your earning power, your financial health, all of that. But mate access is how many banks are actually in your town.
That is a perfect analogy. I mean, you are basically asking the listener to consider how someone's mating success isn't solely dictated by their attractiveness or charisma.
Right, because you could be amazing, but if there's no one around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about your own social circles. You could be incredibly funny, successful, in great shape, giving you a sky-high mate value.
Yep.
But if you live in a tiny, isolated rural town, or maybe you work entirely from home and literally never socialize, your mate access is near zero.
So you will still struggle to find a partner.
Yeah.
You're like an 800 credit score standing in the middle of a desert. There is nowhere to actually get a loan.
It's so true. And this mathematical reality is vital for the researchers' initial hypothesis.
Okay, what did they assume going in?
Well, cross-culturally and historically, studies consistently show that women tend to be more selected in the mating market than men.
Right.
Therefore, heterosexual men who have both low mate value and low mate access are going to face the greatest statistical difficulties finding a partner.
So, if we accept that a low credit score in a town with no banks leaves a person totally isolated, the logical next question is, who do they blame for that isolation?
Exactly.
Like, how does this jump from I can't get a date to harboring broader social prejudices?
To bridge that gap, the researchers utilized a psychological framework called ambivalent sexism theory.
Ambivalent sexism. Okay.
Yeah. This theory proposes that prejudice against women isn't just, a monolithic, aggressive hatred.
Okay, let's unpack this. What are the two faces they measured?
Right, so they use the ambivalent sexism inventory. The first category is hostile sexism.
Hostile sexism.
Yeah, this is what most people picture when they hear the word misogyny. It involves overtly negative, antagonistic attitudes.
So, like, active hostility.
Exactly. On the survey, participants were asked to rate their agreement with statements like, women are easily offended, or women seek to gain power by getting control over men.
Got it. It frames gender relations as this adversarial competition.
Yes, very much an us versus them mentality.
That one is pretty obvious. I think we all recognize that. But the second category they measured is much trickier to wrap your head around, honestly.
It is. The second category is benevolent sexism.
Benevolent.
Right. These are beliefs that seem positive and complimentary on the surface, but they're deeply paternalistic.
How did they measure that one?
In the survey, they asked participants if they agreed with statements like, women should be cherished and protected by men, or women possess a quality of purity that few men possess.
Ah, okay. It's the classic knight in shining armor mentality.
Precisely.
Now, I have to push back here, because I think a lot of people listening might hear that and think, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Opening a door, offering to pay for dinner, wanting to protect your partner in a dangerous situation. How is being benevolent or chivalrous actually classified as sexism?
It's a great question, and the researchers acknowledge that it is a highly complicated dynamic.
Because it seems like just being nice.
Right. But many studies, including the literature cited in this very paper, show that women often actively prefer men who display benevolent sexism.
Wait, really?
Yes. From an evolutionary standpoint, it serves as a strong signal that the man is willing to invest his resources in her and protect potential children.
So society frequently rewards the exact behavior that psychologists are labeling as sexist?
It does. It absolutely does.
That is wild.
However, the reason the psychological community classifies it as sexism is due to its long-term societal effect.
Okay, explain that.
Benevolent sexism fundamentally undermines gender equality by enforcing really rigid traditional roles. By putting women on a pedestal as fragile and pure, it effectively traps them there.
Oh, I see.
The researchers argue that this mentality reinforces the idea that women are, too delicate for the harsh realities of corporate leadership or political power.
So it looks nice, but it's restrictive.
Exactly. It maintains a traditional hierarchy that benefits male dominance. It's just disguised as chivalry.
Wow. The velvet glove over the iron fist?
That's a great way to put it. They are deeply intertwined, and that velvet glove actually serves a very specific function, which we're going to see play out in the data later on.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
But first, the researchers needed to test how dating success or failure impacted these two specific types of sexism.
Which brings us to the core hypothesis of this entire 1,600-person study. The researchers went into this with a very logical, culturally accepted assumption about how dating failure creates hostile sexism.
Right. They looked at the landscape of the modern mating market and hypothesized that heterosexual men with low mate value and low mate access would naturally harbor the most resentment.
Makes sense.
Because these individuals face the highest rates of rejection and total isolation, the researchers predicted their hostile sexism scores would be the absolute highest.
This is the classic internet trope.
Yeah.
The lonely guy sitting in his basement, 0 matches on the dating apps, who slowly gets, radicalized into blaming women for his isolation.
That's the one.
It makes perfect intuitive sense. You get rejected by the system, you hate the system.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Because the data revealed a massive plot twist.
Oh, boy.
That hypothesis. It was completely and utterly wrong.
Wait, let me make sure I'm reading this right. Are you saying the incel trope is completely fabricated by this data? How could that be?
I'm saying the researchers found the exact opposite of their prediction.
The opposite?
Yes. Hostile sexism was actually higher among respondents who reported having more perceived possibilities with potential partners.
What?
And when they looked specifically at singles, hostile sexism was higher for those who reported more actual mate encounters.
That is crazy.
The people going on the most dates were the most hostile.
But that defies all logic. How could active dating possibly make someone more hostile than years of total isolation?
It sounds counterintuitive, but when you look closely at the psychological mechanisms the researchers outline, it makes sense. Hostile sexism is deeply tied to relational insecurity and the friction of the mating market.
Friction. Okay.
Yeah. When a person is totally isolated, sitting in that proverbial basement, they aren't actually facing immediate interpersonal rejection. They are avoiding the game entirely.
Right. They're completely insulated from the actual sting of a bad date.
Exactly. But when you are actively in the dating trenches, having frequent encounters, going on dates, swiping, chatting, you are constantly exposing yourself.
To rejection.
Yes. To the risk of rejection, vulnerability, and just the general feeling of being exploited.
Oh, that makes sense.
The more you interact in a highly competitive mating market, the more relational uncertainty you face. You're sitting across the table wondering, is she talking to someone better? Is he just using me for a free dinner?
Oh, wow. So it's not the absence of the game that makes you hostile. It's the friction of playing it.
Yes. That friction, that constant ego threat of active encounters, is the exact mechanism that drives hostile sexism in this specific sample.
Because they're in it. They're experiencing it.
Right. Active daters are experiencing the churn of the modern dating market firsthand. And that repeated exposure to vulnerability and potential rejection, it fosters a defensive, antagonistic attitude.
That makes so much sense when you think about the emotional toll of modern dating. I mean, it's the churn that burns people out and makes them cynical.
Absolutely.
So, if hostile sexism is driven by the stress and anxiety of the active dating pool, what drives that knight in shining armor mentality of benevolent sexism?
Well, the data had some surprises there, too.
Yeah.
Specifically regarding how different demographics utilize it.
Yeah.
The paper highlighted that single women with more mate encounters actually reported lower benevolent sexism.
Interesting.
And additionally, individuals who were simply not actively searching for a partner at all reported lower benevolent sexism as well.
But on the flip side, the researchers found that people with higher mate value, the highly desirable folks we talked about earlier, they were associated with greater benevolent sexism.
Yeah. And what's fascinating here is how this shifts our entire understanding of benevolent sexism.
From what to what?
From seeing it as just a simple tool of oppression to understanding it as a highly strategic social signal.
I was thinking about this, finding like a high-end luxury brand.
A luxury brand.
Yeah, like you don't buy a Rolex because you desperately need to know the time.
Right.
I mean, you can just check your phone for that. You buy a Rolex to signal something about your status, your wealth, and your expectations to the people around you.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Benevolent sexism seems similar here. It's not born out of desperation or an inability to get a date. It's a signaling strategy used by high-value individuals to broadcast very specific relationship expectations.
That is a highly effective way to frame the researchers' conclusions. We really have to look at the demographics of this specific finished sample to understand it.
Right. Who are they talking to?
A large portion of the respondents were young adults who were not actively seeking a serious long-term partner right then.
Okay.
And in the context of casual, younger dating, men don't actually need to endorse benevolent sexism to attract partners.
Because they aren't looking to settle down.
Exactly. It doesn't serve an evolutionary or social purpose if you just want something casual.
You don't need to play the chivalrous protector, offering to provide for someone's future, if you're literally just meeting up for coffee and seeing where it goes.
Right. Benevolent sexism serves a very different relational function. The researchers note that it usually emerges and intensifies when people get serious about long-term partnership, marriage, and parenting.
So it's for the serious stuff.
Yes. That is the stage where signaling your willingness to invest, protect, and commit becomes highly relevant to the mating market.
Like putting on the Rolex.
Exactly. High-value individuals who are ready for that stage use benevolent sexism as a mutual broadcast. The man signals, I'm capable and ready to provide, and the woman signals, I expect a partner who will invest in me and our potential family.
It's incredible how pragmatic it is under the surface. It's like this ancient evolutionary mating dance, just wrapped up in modern social etiquette.
It really is.
So we've looked at how dating dynamics affect interpersonal sexism, how we view the person sitting across the table from us.
Right.
But the study goes one step further. How does this friction scale up to affect the way people view society as a whole?
Yeah, this is where the researchers transition from individual relationships to broader societal ideologies.
Okay. And to measure this, they investigated a concept known as the belief in sexism shift.
Okay, let's define that for the listener because it's a very specific metric.
It is.
The belief in sexism shift is a zero-sum perspective on gender equality. In the survey, researchers asked participants if they believed that society has fundamentally changed its biases.
I mean, what?
Meaning, have we stopped disadvantaging women and actually started disadvantaging men? It's the belief that men are now the primary victims of systemic sexism.
Right. And to understand the data they collected on this, we really have to contextualize it within the environment of the study itself.
Which was Finland.
Yes. Finland is consistently ranked by global indices as one of the most gender-equal countries in the entire world.
Though the researchers are very careful to note that inequalities do still remain there,
Yes, of course.
impartially pointing out things like a persistent gender pay gap, occupational segregation, and women still carrying a much larger caregiving burden.
Right. It's important to state that. It isn't a perfect utopia, but the baseline for equality is incredibly high compared to other places.
Exactly. But despite this overarching cultural emphasis on equality, the survey results were pretty striking.
What'd they find?
The researchers found that men, and specifically politically conservative individuals, were highly likely to endorse this belief in a sexism shift.
Oh.
Yeah. They genuinely perceive that the societal scales have tipped completely and men are now at a systemic disadvantage.
Oh, this brings us to the golden question of the entire paper, I think.
Oh, definitely.
Did low mate value drive this belief? Like, did the guys who literally cannot get a date blame society and say, the system is rigged against men?
Because again, that is the cultural stereotype we are fed every single day.
Yes. So was it them?
And once again, the researchers' initial hypothesis was completely wrong.
Wow.
The data clearly showed that belief in the sexism shift was not driven by an individual's inability to get a date.
Really?
Yeah, nor was it driven by their self-reported low mate value.
Okay, so if personal dating failure didn't drive this worldview, what did? Like, how did the researchers isolate the actual cause?
Well, they ran regression analyses on the data and found it was heavily predicted by three distinct factors.
Okay, what are they?
Political conservatism, simply being male, and living in a male-biased local sex ratio.
Okay, let's focus on that last one, a male-biased local sex ratio.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
That basically means living in a specific zip code or municipality where there are significantly more men than women, right?
Exactly. From an evolutionary psychology perspective, if there are more men than women in your immediate environment, the competition for mates is just inherently fiercer.
The math is just bad.
Right. Your biological alarm bells are ringing because the numbers are simply against you, regardless of how high your personal credit score is, to use your analogy.
Right. So if we connect this to the bigger picture.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the researchers suggest that this belief in a sexism shift isn't about personal dating frustrations at all.
It's not about the bad Tinder date.
No, it is about a perceived loss of traditional social hierarchy and the anxiety of environmental competition.
So it's political and structural. It's not personal.
Exactly. The authors of the study interpret the data to mean that when society actively pushes for gender equality, those who historically held more power in this case, men, and particularly those who lean conservative and value traditional structures, they can perceive that leveling of the playing field as a direct threat.
Because they're losing an advantage they used to have.
Right. It feels to them like a tangible loss of status. And when you add a male-heavy demographic environment to that, where men feel hyper-competitive just to exist in the social space, that sense of being disadvantaged amplifies exponentially.
That makes a lot of sense.
The data suggests they aren't angry because a specific woman rejected them on an app. They are anxious because the entire societal structure they expected to benefit from feels like it is shifting beneath their feet.
Wow. So what does this all mean?
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. We started out trying to figure out if your frustrating Friday night swiping on an app dictates your political worldview.
Yeah.
And what this deep dive into the source material has shown us is a landscape that is just infinitely more nuanced than the internet algorithms would have us believe.
Oh, infinitely more. The assumption that misogyny is just a byproduct of not being able to get a date is completely debunked by this data.
Totally debunked.
We've learned that hostile sexism actually thrives in the stressful friction of active dating. It is the churn, the vulnerability, and the constant fear of rejection that makes people lash out.
And we've also seen that benevolent sexism isn't always a marker of low status or insecurity either.
Right, quite the opposite.
Instead, the researchers frame it as a complex, high-value luxury signal used by people to navigate and broadcast long-term relationship expectations.
Exactly. And finally, we learned that the belief that men are the new victims of sexism is driven by broader political ideologies and the demographic realities of local competition, not just by lonely Friday nights.
It's fascinating, and as you consider these findings, you might start to see the world a little differently.
I hope so.
Understanding the methodology behind this study can fundamentally change how you interpret the dating behavior you experience and the political rhetoric you encounter in your own life.
Yes. For example, when someone exhibits hostile sexism on a date, you might now recognize the deep-seated insecurity and relational anxiety actually driving it,
Right.
rather than assuming they're just an isolated loner who hates women.
It just adds an entirely new dimension to human behavior. It reminds us that our social ideologies are often just masks for our most primal insecurities.
It really does. It totally changes the lens through which we view these interactions.
It brings us back to that couch, right? Staring at the phone, swiping left and right, dealing with the friction of the modern mating market, the churn. And it leaves me with one final lingering thought for you to mull over. If our broader social beliefs, our politics, and our deep-seated prejudices are so heavily dictated by our biological drive to find a mate and protect our egos from rejection,
Yeah.
how much of our worldview is actually based on objective truth, and how much of it is just an evolutionary defense mechanism perfectly designed by our brains to help us survive the brutal, everyday friction of trying to find love?